Welcome back to Morning Express, and well, it's Wednesday, and therefore today we focus on the newsroom. We look at how some of the stories have been covered, whether we have ignored some, the angles that we have taken, if they have been correct, have we been biased? Remember, you're welcome to participate in this conversation, and Michelle is going to be looking at some of the feedback that's coming in as we continue with the show. So as the Twitter handles are displayed as we carry on, feel free to let us know what your thoughts are. But let me start by introducing the panel that we have this morning. And to my extreme left, we have Patrick Gadhara, who's a cartoonist, but also a communications consultant. Next to him, we have Professor Michael Wainaina and Victor Bwire, who is a Deputy CEO for Media Council of Kenya. Pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Last but not least, we have Eric Oduor, who is a Secretary General at the Kenya Union of Journalists. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the newsroom this morning. And let me start with what I think has been in the news lately, and this is bound to affect us as the media, and this is the government ban on advertising on mainstream media, and also the launch of what now is known as My Government editorial newspaper, which is where they're going to have their advertisements run. Of course, what the government has said so far is this is to save on costs. Let me start with Gadhara, on your thoughts on that.
Well, first, it's not really a ban on advertising in the mainstream press. What it is, from my understanding, is that the government essentially wants to have an insert in the press, its own newspaper distributed via the mainstream press, but it will put its own ads within the insert, and so that other government functionaries wouldn't be allowed to put their ads outside of this insert. I think that is very, very problematic for me. First, of course, it does deny revenue to the mainstream press, which is actually doing the distribution of these ads. The second thing is it's an attempt by the government essentially to force the mainstream press to carry its own content, so that they don't have a say into what else goes into this MyGov newspaper, even though it's being run essentially on their platforms. So I think that it's quite problematic. It's not the first time we've seen the government try to do this. We know in Kanu days they had their own newspaper that they ran, the Kenya Times, that didn't do too well, stuff. So I understand the argument that the government is not in the job of making the media money. It's not in the job of providing advertising for media. But this, for me, doesn't look like a cost-cutting exercise so much as it is an attempt by government to essentially dictate the content that goes into newspapers.
Eric, your thoughts on that, and whether you think the government is being genuine on saying that their reason is to cut down on costs? Is it more to control the content that they can give out there? They control, because My Government is their paper, essentially.
I think this is a song of the government try to cut costs. I think we've heard it several times. And what the government is doing here, the government has got no business in doing business. The responsibility of the government is to ensure that we have got a conducive environment for businesses to thrive. And therefore, what the government is supposed to be telling us to ensure that if they advertise with the mainstream media or the private media, the taxpayers are going to get the value for their money. And even if you read the Constitution, in the event that we are going to have the state media, the government has got no business in interfering with the editorial independence of the state media. And therefore, this, like I released a statement yesterday, and I said this is just another scandal in the making. Not long ago, I think like around 4 years ago, we had a government paper called Kenya Today. What happened? It's another scandal that's never been told. Probably the media need now to go back, given that we've given another opportunity to go and find out what happened to Kenya Today, because it's also folded up. Probably just to correct what Gadhara said, Kenya Times was a party newspaper. It was a newspaper that was owned by KANU, and I think we probably just need to distinguish that was KANU newspaper. That's why when KANU was kicked out of power, then the paper also folded up. So even if the government also wants to cut down on cost, we should also be looking at sustainable projects. Because by the end of the day, what happens if you do not have this government in power next time? When another government comes in power, it will have its own agenda. And therefore, what we need to do, the government just needs to provide the environment for businesses to thrive.
Do you feel by them having this pull-out paper that they have, my government, then they are curtailing the environment for having free press?
Exactly what the government is saying and is telling the media in a clever way is that we are now coming to invade your space. Because once you've told them, the government agencies that they should not advertise the private media, that means what you are doing is you are starving them of revenue. And if you are starving a business revenue, then what will happen? That means that the government, the operations of those media houses will now have to be scaled down. Yes.
All right, Victor Bwire, your thoughts and whether really, well, according to the ICT CS, he says that...
The PH for Broadcasting and Telecommunication.
Correct. Well, his argument is that despite the argument that they are removing revenue, they will be paying for distribution because they're not going to distribute it. They'll still use mainstream newspapers to distribute, those who will agree to distribute it. So there'll still be revenue from that. Do you buy into that?
Thank you, Mike. One, I think the good thing that is happening is that media, we have not been consistent in looking at the industry and what is happening in the industry. So that anytime anything happens, we're always rushing and reacting. Because tendencies have been there. One, when they formed, for example, the government advertising agency, what was the media's reaction to that? We kept quiet, I mean, at that level. Now, there have been efforts by other players to help government in harmonizing communication. There is now a government communication strategy that was supported and is there. There is a move towards harmonizing public communication and a training has been done. There is a move to make a media center, and there's a media center actually at the ministry. And what has been is to harmonize government communication. How has media been reacting? Who has been following this development in the industry? Because this, starting of my government is not something that somebody just woke up one day and there has been consistent steps and some of them people saying we need government to harmonize. So to me, in fact, when they reviewed the Procurement Act, remember the Procurement Act was reviewed to say that you can advertise, because previously it had said you advertise in two leading enterprise with biggest circulation. But now it was changed and they added, in the review, that you can even now do that or run on your website. That's already in the law. So who has been following that? So to me, I don't want to react. Two, at the council level, we are looking at it in the sense that we want to make an informed position on the issue after some studies. So we are studying and seeing, because there's already a paper that has been prepared on government, for example, advertising, centralized government advertising, doing a comparison between Kenya and China, for example, and other countries. And what are the benefits? So at the council, what we are doing, we don't want to rush into looking at, without. So we have commissioned some understanding of what this...
So do you feel it's too early to make a decision or to make... But sure, isn't it part of our responsibility to kind of, think what is the game plan, what is happening here? Because given the fact that government is one of the biggest advertisers, or in terms of revenue, would that affect the media, mainstream media?
Obviously, there will be an implication, but in one of the discussions we had yesterday, we were even looking at it in what has been the government advertising contribution to some of the media houses we are talking about. What are the current statistics, for example, so that when we say this ban is bad, then two, the other thing we need to also put in context is that some of the adverts that even run on behalf of government agencies are sometimes paid by development partners. They are not directly government revenue. So that, again, how much that government, for example, we were advised to be running all our adverts through GA, for example, Media Council, as a state. But we don't have a budget. So we have never run an advert through GA. Because what they do, if you ask the GA to run an advert on your behalf, they ask you, give us the budget. We are just coordinating. We are not. So it had no impact to us, because in the first place, we did not. So most of the adverts we run are paid for directly sometimes by other colleagues. So that's why I'm saying that while in terms of perception, it would be seen to be that, but in in practice, what is the experience?
What is on the ground? All right,
Yes.
Professor, your thoughts on this?
I think there is a way in which we are assuming that in this country there is something called state and something called media, and these two are completely two different and related entities.
Are you suggesting that there is no difference?
I am saying that that needs to be problematized. We cannot assume that there is something called state and something called media, and that media is totally independent from this thing called state or from this thing called government. Why I'm saying we need to problematize that is when government starves media, in quotes, okay, who is it starving? Given the fact that the ownership of this media is not as independent as we imagine that it is. If we flip that argument then, there is a case to be made that if government or the state decides to starve media, okay, then it is a good thing for independent practitioners to be able to do what they want without feeling that they are beholden to government anyway. Because part of the reason why media censors itself is because it knows that some of its bills are paid by government. So if government decides that from tomorrow we are not paying any of your bills, it's good riddance, and practitioners can take that space and be more independent than they are being right now.
I'll disagree a little bit there. I think that first we've got to look at the numbers. The government is the biggest advertiser in our media.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, so I mean, this definitely has an impact on them in terms of when they cut down on the amount of advertising they do or that they pay out to mainstream press. That does have an impact on them. And we as a society have to think about what is the role of our media here, and do we want, because the government in the end should be our agent. You know, it doesn't always act that way, but it should be our agent. But we should be thinking, what's the role we want, and is it in our interest to have this situation where the media is then starved off of this revenue? The second thing I would slightly disagree with Professor here is that if the problem is that government uses advertising as a lever with which to pressure the press into more favorable reporting, the way to fix that is not to remove the advertising. The way to fix that is to stop government using it as a lever, is to remove that power from government to decide. You know, and this comes from differentiating functions, you know, so that within government itself, within the procedures that go on to deciding where these things go, who actually makes that decision and on what basis. You know, those are the things we should be looking at. Mm-hmm. The second thing I will say, or the final thing I'll say, is the media here is not blameless. I think for a very long time, it has coddled government. Right now, I find it funny that they complain about this insert and the fact that they won't have any input into it, when they've been running press releases from the PSCU as news. When they report on the State House, they get, you get a news piece from State House written, authored by PSCU. That is a press release. You're running it as it is written, without any editorial input from yourself, without you looking at it. Does it make sense? Is it true? Is it not true? You're just putting it in your papers. Mm-hmm. And once you open that door, then you're creating problems for yourselves down the line. And this is the thing I keep saying about our press. We've got to be much more circumspect about what we choose to put in our papers. Okay. And the moment we do that, then when they bring in this, then we have a standing within which to say, well, actually, we can't run that, without us having eyes on it.
Practically looking at how adverts run even, and that's why we were saying we are a bit cautious in terms of looking at it. This pull-out is a weekly pull-out, for example. It's 8 pages, for example. If you look at how many adverts from government agencies run in our print papers between Monday and Friday, you obviously see there will be, that pull-out cannot manage to carry all those adverts. Remember, there are some of these supplements that go for 4 or 5 pages from one agency. So that even note from the chief head of civil service has exceptions. Because an agency can make a case that we have an advert that is 8 pages that must run on a Monday. This pull-out comes out on a Thursday. So there will be exemption. It's not a blanket thing. So there will be case-by-case consideration of when and how these things are done.
But me, I'm seeing it this way, Victor. I think nothing stops the government or whoever is producing that pull-out from upaging, even from 8 to 12 pages, because even we know that even what happens with the newspapers, you can have a newspaper that is 58 pages, then 62 pages, then the pages go up depending on the content and the business that actually the paper has. But to me, I'm looking at this. Number one, I think it also has to be gotten out clearly that we as the media, we are not begging for revenue from the government. What we are saying is that we need transparency. We are in a liberalized economy, whereby we don't expect the government, because I'm referring to a memo or a circular that was issued by head of a civil service to all state agencies, directing them not to advertise the private media. What we are saying is that we do not want such kind of directives, because basically we know in this country, such projects, actually the motivating factors is actually what is going to be my cut, not the end result of that project. So what we are saying is let the market forces help the government in terms of dealing with some of these issues. If the government feels that it needs to have its own newspaper, well and good. It will even be good for the industry. It will be good for me as a SG of KUJ, because it's going to create more jobs for journalists. Let the government tell us that, okay, fine, as the government, we just realize that we also need a newspaper or a state newspaper that we are going to use to churn out our information. Then this is the process. This is going now to be under the Ministry of Information and Communication, or under KNA, or under which department, so that they can recruit journalists who are going to do professional jobs, because even the Constitution envisages that we are going to have a state media. We already have KBC. So if the government wants to come with a newspaper, let the government tell us that, okay, fine, as the government, you want to come up with a newspaper, or establishing a newspaper, and this is the process of recruiting the people who are going to work with this newspaper, and this is going to be a department, period.
All right, I guess, like Victor says, it might be too early to actually tell what the impact will be.
Although one thing I will add on the issue of the state newspaper, in case as the route that they choose to go and they set it up as an independent paper, I think we've got to be careful, as we saw with KBC, before it was VOK, and it can become simply a mouthpiece for government. And this is funded by taxpayers. You know, and there is a sense where if it's a public broadcaster, it's not there to serve the government or the executive, or simply to have stories that favor them, you know. And that's where it goes to us asking then, how are these editorial decisions made? How are people recruited? Because this is all our money. Let's not forget, the government doesn't have its own pot of cash. It's our money that they're choosing to use. You know, and they've got to come back and be accountable to us for it. You know, and they've got to actually explain what is the space that this private newspaper is going to, or this public newspaper is going to be filling, that is not filled by the private papers.
Maybe a quick figures from the Media Owners Association on this impact would have also helped us. Where are the media owners in this debate? Because they have the figures. Right. And when we are talking about loss or benefit or impact, they should quickly be helping us understand as an industry what is the impact of this.
We'll wait and see how that pans
out. For example, GA, what was the experience of the media owners with the government advertising agents that we can learn from?
All right, I want us to move on to something else now. And I think it was on Wednesday we had the communications, was it Monday, I think? We had the communications authority with the IEBC call journalists, and this is what they were discussing, responsible reporting of the elections. And I just want to hear your take, first of all, on whether we are on the money as we speak, because we're already on high gear when it comes to campaign mode between now and August, on whether we have been responsible so far and what the Communications Authority had to say. Let me hear from you, Eric, first, on whether we have been on the money so far.
Like I've always said, and I still repeat, because I haven't told CA this, that Communication Authority should concentrate on issues to do with infrastructure. Issues to do with editorial content, they should stay away from it, because number one, they do not have the experience, they don't have the expertise to deal with those issues. And therefore, and I've always maintained that as a responsibility of the Media Council. And therefore, the Communication Authority should be asking the people whom they give the licenses, how they are utilizing the infrastructure. Then let them allow the Media Council to deal with the issues of editorial content. So I still hold that the Media Council or the industry as a whole should come up with a policy on issues of, to deal with journalists who have political ambitions.
Okay. Professor?
In terms of reporting, and I think it's a much more determinable topic than the topic of the money, because the money people are usually not in the newsroom like us talking here. They are somewhere behind the scenes. Somewhere in the scenes.
Some boardroom.
Yes, and that's why Eric was saying, can these guys come and tell us about this money thing? You know, we need figures. We are groping in the dark. But at least when it comes to reporting and what comes out, we are not groping in the dark. One of the things that I have raised about reporting in the election period is a kind of narrative that the media is building up thing. Yesterday we had a headline that said NASA raids. Okay, we are hearing language about battlegrounds. We are hearing a language about one bullet remaining. We are hearing language about strongholds. For a country that is emerging from conflict that had arisen from a contested election, I don't think that this is very sensible language for the media to be using today. Like I have said before, language does not just express or present reality. Language creates reality of its own. And when, for example, there is no reason why that headline would not have communicated the same message without using the word raids and strongholds and battlegrounds and jeshi and creating a sense of very serious antagonisms in a space that is already very antagonistic. So yes, as far as I'm concerned, there is reason to be concerned and reason to be worried. And if we want to support free, fair, and peaceful elections, then we cannot build narratives of conflict and violence by the language that we use.
All right, Victor, how important is the language that we use to communicate? Because there's a fine line between what Prof is saying in terms of reality and now whipping up emotions based on how we phrase what we phrase. For instance, he's used the word battleground. That's a very common word that we use in the media. You've also got strongholds, which create an impression that these politicians are not meant to be there, or these are not there. They're not favored to be there, but they're there. It's a stronghold of the other side. Your thoughts on the language that we use?
Largely, this is a language that is purely business language, in the sense
you need to sell the paper.
That's exactly, and we are seeing a lot of big influence of the advertising departments in editorial news making, so that what would sell becomes, news is increasingly becoming a product for sale, which is very dangerous, like you are saying, that sometimes news is for public good, and sometimes it's not just the selling, but what are we creating? So yes, the issue of language is a big concern for us. It's even worse in some of the stations, the FM stations, the language that is being used. So in one of the, actually we are launching that document next week, one of the guidelines we have released for elections reporting for journalism, we are launching it on 7th actually next week, is the conflict-sensitive reporting. There's a whole chapter and a few of the things we have suggested that let's be sensitive. We are not censoring anybody, use any language you, but be sensitive that once you use a particular word, what does it then? So what we are requesting is purely on sensitivities around how we frame things. There's already the problem of coded language in most of the FM stations, and in counties like Nakuru, for example, which are mixed populations, and other counties, Isiolo, we are already having a lot of problems. So we are just requesting that responsibility, that before you use a word.
But isn't that already contained in the 25 points of the Code of Ethics for Journalists? Isn't that already defined there?
Very well defined. But like I have mentioned here, the orientation to the code of ethics by someone, because the transition rate, and I will tell you as a Secretary General, the transition rate in journalism is too high, so that the person who you trained today is not there tomorrow. So we keep on, and in most of our FM stations, we have people who have never seen the code of ethics, the practice of journalism.
Then that, of course, would bring question into the quality of the journalists that we have.
Yes.
It's a big issue.
And the code of ethics, Michael, has to be contextualized. The code of the ethics is a generic document. Contexts change. I'll give you an example. If you take a code of ethics of Kenyan journalism or journalism the world over, if you go, for example, and this is an example, to America, for example, and you are reporting on battlegrounds and you are reporting on strongholds and you're using on swing states and you're using those, okay, those terms, those terminologies don't mean the same here once you contextualize them here. So the same code of ethics that asks you to be sensitive means that it now has to be contextualized so that what is normalized in the US now needs to be interpreted here within a contextual frame that makes it either desirable or undesirable. And I think that is the sensitivity that they're talking about.
But to me, I have a different view. Yes. And I think so far in our newspapers or radio stations or television stations, I haven't seen very strong language. And I can defend some of the headlines because they are also written in some context. And I will only have an issue if we have probably information or words that are inciting the public, which I haven't seen so far. So as during elections, we've been responsive, I haven't seen anything.
I think if you look at FM stations and how they're reporting, especially the vernacular FM stations, there's lots of sort of, if not outright incitement, at least polarizing talk that's going on in vernacular FM. You know, we shouldn't really disregard, and that is part of the media. You know, I think that when you remember the experience of 2008, we really need to concentrate on what those guys are doing. When it comes to mainstream press, for me, the big deficit where the media is concerned is reporting that is simply based on what politicians say. And it reduces the basis, the substance of politics to a he said, she said sort of game. You know, where it is seen simply as this contestation between Jubilee and now NASA or CORD or whatever you call them. You know, but not really a discussion of the issues. What is the stake that the public has in this fight between these two guys? What should it be about?
But is there a possibility, Gathara, that even as the politicians go out there, they don't really talk about issues?
Well,
all they do is discuss each other and who said what.
That's my exact point. Yesterday, Raila was in Meru, you know, and he goes on about how he has a new vision, new policies. Nobody stands up and asks, what are these policies? Vision? What is this vision?
Well, they might argue and say NASA has come out with a 7-point
but really? Are those policies?
And
that's my point. Is we need to be drilling down and forcing them. We've got a drought right now. People are dying, people are starving.
What's the solution?
What would you have done?
But we need to be also alive.
And not just say government has failed. That is fine. It's okay.
We need to be alive to the practicalities.
Let's hear from Victor.
We need to be alive to practicalities. Standard newspaper, Nation News, have started pullouts on issues that people should focus on. And they're churning out on, specifically, Nation has a 12-point charter, for example. Standard has its own charter on watch points. And they're already pulling out, those pullouts are there. And in an environment like Meru public rally, or how do a journalist access Raila and ask him that question? If he's on the podium,
let's be necessarily asking him in person. But I think as you're doing the report, you can actually say this is what he said. However, there's nothing clear in terms of...
And that is there. If you look at the articles that have been written today, those issues are there.
Actually, if you listen to the reporting yesterday on the presentation of the rally, there's none of that. There's no discussion of what the issues are.
You know,
he said this.
Not,
but there could also be the practical side of it.
Let me say this. I think sometimes that when we criticize or look at what is happening in the media, sometimes we sort of try to live in utopia whereby we don't want to be real. The truth is, what I know, and Nation has done this, Standard has done this, Star does this every day. Most of these teams, they usually do market research to find out what does the consumer need. And at least for that one, I'm sure that These companies, they do research and they know what the consumer needs. And how do we satisfy the needs of the consumer? What kind of the news that the consumer needs? I don't think, what kind of the news that the consumer actually is looking for. I don't think these newspapers are that stupid that they'll just be churning out this newspaper if the public does not want that information. So that is why we have a big let me say, that is why we have got different sections. That's why different sections that if the consumer wants a Harela headline, give them a Harela headline, but within the newspaper.
Really? But
exactly.
honestly, that would make us then question what is our responsibility.
That's what I'm saying. That's why
we just there to feed the people with what they want to get.
That is why you even see the Nation and even the newspaper and Standard, they will have different pullouts within the newspaper whereby they are setting the agenda. Where they are now setting the agenda. If you look at all these papers, they have got those sections where, but okay, fine, if we are going to have the news of the day, but again, we also analysis. And that's why different newspapers have got different products.
Is it
a fact, number one, that circulations are falling with the newspapers? If they are so good at this market research, and that is what is driving all the reporting, and they're giving people what they want, how come people aren't buying their papers? The point is, you're going beyond. I mean, the press is not, I mean, they sensationalize the news because they're trying to create furore. In a very real sense, they create the expectation within the public of what they will report. It's not so much that if they actually got serious about giving us the news, they wouldn't sell papers. In fact, I would say it's probably the opposite, that they would sell more. You know, the thing is, for as long as our reporting is only contained within the issues that affect our political class, that it is only the perspective of our political class that matters. It is not us, it's not the rest of us or the rest of society and what their stake is in these elections that is reported. When Victor says about these pullouts that are coming out now, the charters and everything that the Nation are doing, my question has always been, why haven't they been doing this from 2013? Is it that we only have issues when elections come along? You know, and let me finish. In the end, I think, even when they put out those charters, that should be informing, should be the basis on which they report. When that guy stands up at a podium and says, ABCD government has failed, or we are government, we have provided 1, 2, 3, go back to your charter. All right, these are the issues. You know, and within the grain of your report, when you're talking about it in that 30, 40 seconds or 2 minutes that you're covering that speech, let us tell us, you know, where has he covered?
I think studies have been done. Studies have been done. Papers have been produced. Our own Joe Cardi has written extensively on elections reporting. And in election reporting, there are two aspects. There's the game of strategy and the substance of election. These are studies that have been done. And when you are reporting as a journalist or a media house in election, you make a distinction between game of strategy and substance of election. And all the studies that have been done, 70% is always on game of strategy, 30% is always on substance of election. Game of strategy is the dancing, the calling, that's game of strategy. And studies have been done globally, so it's not a Kenya problem. So we must also look at what happens elsewhere. So what sells? Is it the substance of the election, or is it the game of strategy? People want people to dance.
So you're suggesting that strategy sells?
Michael, the discussion that is going on here is legitimate, and I agree with it for so long as it is understood within the lane that it's coming from. When he says game of strategy and of substance, and Gadara says that we need to infuse the stories that we get from the politicians with some interrogation. Politics is about narratives. The antidote to narratives is counter-narratives. And what Gadara is saying is that as soon as you report the narrative from the politician, within that story, you need to start to deconstruct that narrative or to interrogate it. Because if it goes without being interrogated and without being deconstructed, it forms opinions. So that I agree when Victor says there are strategies, there are substance, and there are ways in, and there are pullouts. He's talked about pullouts and newspapers explaining themselves that these are the issues. Can we infuse the two and make sure that we don't just foreground the narrative that comes from the politicians, hoping that in a pullout next week, we are going to address
No,
and there's one other thing.
I don't think that is right, and I don't think that's what we are doing. That's what I say, that when these studies are done, and you know that the consumer actually expects this from the newspaper. When you are in daily newspapers, there are usually different pages that are actually trying to address some of the concerns that the professor is talking about. It's not a once a week pull-out that we do to deal with these issues. All the newspapers have got different products to deal with the different issues in the society. And most of these issues are addressed based on those products.
You know, I think we have requested media, for example, most of our parties, and let's be frank, I've looked at least 6 manifestos of the political parties. Most of our parties' manifestos are cut and paste of each other. We are social liberal, Democrats or liberal. We are all, and sometimes there's nothing to interrogate even. Sometimes there's nothing even to interrogate.
Right.
It's just a cut and paste.
And what would you attribute that to? Is it the quality of journalists that come from school and our perception of what reporting on what the politicians have said?
Mike, I'll agree. And this is a discussion we've had. There's a problem in training of journalists in this country. That one is a fact. We are trying to come up, we have come up with a national curriculum, for example, because what happens, and at least I've gone to journalism at different levels. In first year, you are taught introduction to news writing 1. In second year, introduction to news writing 2. In third year, introduction. These are all the same things. So yes. It's a big challenge. Yeah. Now, like when the School of Journalism, for example, they introduced the postgraduate diploma or masters at the University of Nairobi at that time, it was responding to how do we train people from various fields at a postgraduate level now to have the nuts and bolts of writing. They have some content. But what we are doing right now, we are teaching people 4 years the nuts and bolts of writing or broadcasting without the content. So that's why we are asking media, training colleges to review their curriculum so that we also have content. So that this person is good in writing or broadcasting, but he has some content to broadcast.
Yeah, but I think beyond that, for me, one of the things that's really missing within our media is the context. Yeah. You know, is that when you go and you report the news or you get a story out there, you don't infuse it with the context, with the background. And there's just one last thing I'll quickly say, because that's what we started with, about the CA's announcement.
Now, I want you to continue with the context, and the reason why I'm interrupting you is because I want to bring in another subject of discussion. This was brought about by the Deputy President with the shoot-to-kill order, and we're talking about interrogating and putting context. And the question, we'll have that clip playing just a bit, what he had to say about the shoot-to-kill order. But when we report, and there's also the aspect of repeating what he has said without contextualizing, number one, and number two, without interrogating its constitutionality. Right. I'd like to hear from you, and let's just hear what he had to say, then I'll come back to you, Gadara.
Aliye na silaha ameua kina mama na watoto, pia na yeye asibakishwe.
Tuko na askari wengi na mimi nitakuwa hapa Monday saa 3, mimi nitakuwa hapa. Tukubaliane hii mambo ya usalama hapa, munieleze vizuri. Mimi siwezi kuwa nakuja hapa naambiwa na wananchi hapa ati askari wanakula mandazi, sijui wanakula mkate na blueband. Lazima tukuje tukubaliane hii kazi itapangwa namna gani na usalama itapangwa namna gani.
All right, coming back, Gadara, your comments on...
Well, again, we really got to ask ourselves, and you go and get that clip. Yes, the Vice President has said this, and the way report he has said this. But what's the context of it? What powers does he actually have, under the Constitution, number one, to direct the police, and then secondly, to essentially...
give a shoot-to-kill order.
Yeah, to remove the protections that we have. Don't forget, these are protections exist, not for the bad guys. They exist for all of us. So at the moment you say that the police can assume somebody has killed somebody, somebody has murdered a child or a mother or whatever, and then shoot them, what you're saying is they can assume it on the basis, on you as well. They can meet you on the street and just make that assumption. The reason why we have courts and we have a justice system is so they don't make that assumption. It's so that they've got to actually prove it before they can take away your freedoms or your rights. What he's saying there essentially is removing all the constitutional protections. He has no power to do this. And he needs to be reminded over. And it shouldn't be a case where we report what he said and then we wait till the next day or the next other day when some other politician stands up and says, well, no, you shouldn't be saying this, and then we report a counter thing. No,
Eric,
we should be countering it there and then.
Your thoughts on how we should contextualize, because as we're getting closer to the election day, we are likely to have a lot of what some would term as hate speech as well. Yes. And under the code of conduct, we are, as the media, are not supposed to repeat, especially when it is incitive. But we have a tendency to pick the soundbite, play it, and run it as news, whereas we don't interrogate or contextualize. Your thoughts on this particular one and maybe moving forward?
Actually, that is some dangers that actually media sometimes they find themselves, journalists find themselves in. Because when you repeat that, and actually the National Integration Commission has always been said that even repetition actually also republishing also amounts to the offense. So journalism must also be alive to the fact that if you repeat that or you publish that, that means that you can also be held liable for whatever happened. So in this particular case, I think what happens is, and again, I know like what journalists usually do, once they get this information like this one of shoot to kill, they usually do the story. And within that story, they also talk to different players and different actors to find out if what the politician has said actually is correct or is constitutional. So again, let us not vilify journalists, because I know what happens is we write that story, and within that story, you'll find that the journalists also get reach out to other players also to get their comments, like human rights defenders and other officials, even within the government, even the police. So they cover that story. Yes, the deputy president said this, but according to the Kenyan National Commission on Human Rights or the Human Rights Watch, this is what they say. And actually, that's the work of the journalists. That's what they usually do.
I think to expect media not to cover the deputy president giving a shoot to kill to order will be an understatement. I mean, there is no way media could ignore that.
It's how they cover it.
But going forward, I remember, and this is a story that happened, people gave, and there were different actors who made comments in that story to say, yes, he said this, but according to what Gazara is saying, the Constitution says this. So we have done a content analysis of that, and we can share. When the Deputy President said that, and it was reported, but there were different voices raising some of the unconstitutionalities and some of the challenges. And I mean, we were in press pass on Monday, and we discussed about it. And we said, I mean, so let's not say that.
But that's the exact point. If you're waiting
people
for press pass on Monday, I mean, when he made the statement, that's what I'm saying. When this statement is reported, and it's the same thing our professor was saying before, is that in the reporting itself, when you say this, actually it wasn't. And that's my thing, is it waits till somebody else makes a statement, and then we report on that statement.
I think you want
I think the feeling I'm getting here that we read the headlines, but we don't read the headlines.
Actually,
read the headline.
Let me hear from Prof. Let me hear from Prof. Then we'll have Michelle come in with some feedback.
And the reason we read the headlines is because you have said that the headlines have been made to attract a certain narrative, that you have to sell papers. Gadara is right. The rebuttal or the contextualizing of the shoot to kill order is issued by the deputy president, okay? And then when you're doing the story, you go and look for Kenyan National Human Rights guy to ask him if that is legal. What I would expect the journalists to do is to actually call the IG and ask the IG if he is going to effect the shoot to kill order that has come from the deputy president.
But he had said it.
Now, he had said it, and we are saying it is illegal, number one. We are saying he doesn't have the power to order the police to do that, okay? So the story, the counter story, or the counter, what am I looking for? Narrative, the counter opinion.
The alternative narrative.
The alternative narrative, yes.
I think
should be embedded in the information reporting.
I think
it should come from the IG. It cannot come from Wainaina or from the...
I think the other thing we need to also interrogate is the fact, was he making an order?
Yes.
Or was he making a statement? Like, you can just talk, with people and say...
Actually, that's actually a good point, because the Constitution is clear that any orders that they give, any directions that they give, has to be in writing. And I don't know whether anybody...
That's by Friday.
What probably I'll suggest...
One at a time.
What I'll suggest that probably after this session, probably if there is an early assignment, you can allow the reporter to tag along with Gadara and Professor so that they can experience what the journalists go through. Because I can imagine whereby the deputy president, where the deputy president has made that announcement or had issued that order, then you wait for him there, then you ask him. Sometimes even practically impossible to reach him. Yeah. Number two, even getting the IEG he's talking about. Because I know in the newsroom when you are looking for people to react and to give comments on to a given statement, you usually have a list of people. You could even have a list of 10. But out of 10, you can only get 2. And by the end of the day, the story has to run.
Exactly. And actually, one.
I want to bring in Michelle with some of the feedback.
Just 2 seconds. One, the deputy president said a gazette notice to that effect will be done. 2, the IG had accompanied the president. They were there. And he also made the same statement. 3, Gadara has worked in a more hostile environment in Somalia with AMISOM, so he knows what we talk about. So some of these challenges and practicalities, he knows he went through.
A lot of feedback on social media, and Gidua seems to agree with Professor Wanaina here, saying the media to blame themselves. They hire amateurs, hence garbage in, garbage out. And then we had asked the question this morning as to whether the freedom of the media has shrunk under the Jubilee regime. That is a conversation on our social media pages this morning, and a lot of feedback coming in. Paul Otieno says the media has not only shrunk but also mutilated from day one with the famous tea. This is the tea that journalists took at State House with President Uhuru Kenyatta. But he also says that to one extent the media have only themselves to blame. But even as we answer this question, guys, let's take a look at Kenya's standing in the World Press Freedom Index since 2013 when Jubilee took power. So in 2013, Kenya was position 71 out of 180 countries. Fast forward to 2014, just a year later, Kenya drops about 20 points to position 90 out of 180 countries. And then we move on to 2015. Kenya moves down another 10 points to position 100 out of 180 countries. And now in 2016, the latest, Kenya is position 95. So it moved down 5 other points. And we're waiting to see where Kenya stands this year. And so it's not just talk from journalists, from Kenyans. This is being witnessed even on the global arena, that the world press freedom in Kenya really is being curtailed.
Right. Actually, let me tell you another story based on that. Last year, according to Center for Protection of Journalists report, Kenya was categorized with Somalia, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and Burundi. And Kenya was actually placed as one of the most dangerous countries for journalists to work in. Mm-hmm. That was the CPJ's report last year.
So again, to support what you just said, if you look at the attacks on journalists, especially since Jubilee came into power, it's not that they weren't happening before, but they've actually worsened, And these are attacks not just by bandits, whatever, but by government officials. Everybody remembers in Tana River when the GSU were beating up journalists. Arrests of journalists and bloggers, as another metric. The expulsion of international journalists, which is happening here, which creates another environment of people simply being afraid to report. These things are all happening. There has been a curtailing, if you will. And if you look at the laws that have been put in, from the security laws amendments that were put there, the media laws that were proposed, there has been a move where the government has actually seen the media and the openness within the press to be a problem, and to try and curtail that. But I also think that the media needs to be introspective here, that it has played along to a very large extent with the bad things the government is doing. So when the government went after civil society, very clearly the media was beating that drum along with them. They didn't stand up for, actually this should not be happening. And the only times we've seen the media really stand up is when their own interests have been attacked. And that's my thing. Let me just finish one last thing. Is for as long as they don't recognize that when government goes after these other people, whether it's Muslims, whether it's Somalis, whether it is civil society, in the end, those are the very protections for the press.
All right, we need to wind up.
If you get rid of those...
I want us to wind up with closing or parting shots, and I'll put it in form of a question starting with you. Eric, your one-sentence advice to the media. What is it that we need to do differently?
The media must stand firm and be accurate and objective in their reporting.
Victor?
Media must remain professional, but we also need to work together. The various media players need to start looking at the general trends and start reacting as an industry and a profession.
All right, Professor?
Language is constitutive. When you are writing, you are not only reporting and you're not only presenting reality, you are creating a reality. And you have to be very sensitive to what reality you're creating.
Background, history, context. Those are the things that matter. Those should be in every story that you write. You shouldn't be waiting till the next week or the next day to start rebutting the wrong things that have been said.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. That is the newsroom. And just to mention, because yesterday I know it came up, and we had talked about representation, gender, but I did try to reach out to several ladies. But for one reason or the other, because somebody asked me the other day, why is your set just full of men?
There's somebody else who's talking about that today. Eve says, Morning Express has a 100% male panel today.
No, Michelle is
I came in at the end.
You're part of us.
But then, like you said, perception is reality. So, Michelle, take us out of the break.
All right, and feedback on our Twitter page, we were asking you, has media freedom shrunk under the Jubilee regime, and results are in 60% of you say yes, media freedom has been curtailed, and 24% of you say no, while 16% say I don't care. And just to sample your, they don't care, just to sample your final comments here, Fred Ouma says the media leadership has been compromised by the government of Kenya. And Mwalimu Mkuu says no, the media became an appendage of ANASA. And that's an interesting comment there. And we have Givor here. No, Maiga says media should be free and independent according to the Constitution, but they do have themselves to blame for some of what is going on with the government. And then finally, Patrick says it's all fake media. What we need in Kenya is real media. All right, we do thank you for your feedback on our Twitter page this morning. Do keep the conversation going. This has been the Newsroom right here on Morning Express. We'll take a short break now. Remember, for those on KTN Home, Life and Style is coming up next. But for those on KTN News, our top stories this hour are up next. And then later on, we'll focus on your health. Good morning.